welcome to my talk today, to the devotional for today. Uh, Beautiful day here in Nova Scotia. I hope your day is going well. We're looking at Proverbs chapter 7, verse 8 today, and I'll read it in a moment. But just to remind anybody who's been following along, this piece of Proverbs takes place in a little story. It's a father telling his son, and metaphorically, it's God telling us. But it's the father telling his son about listening to his teaching, so it will protect him, so he'll grow in wisdom and protect him. And he tells this little story about looking out through his window. So he's saying to us, "I looked out through my window and I saw among the young people, the naive. I saw one particular youth who had no sense, and he goes through the streets and finds this woman, and he has an adulterous affair with her, and in the end it ends up costing him his life. The husband, or in theory the husband, is the one who kills him, but at any rate, that's the story in a nutshell. Now you could read it, it's about 20 verses there, but verse 8 is in the middle of that, and so it's talking about this young man, and it says that he observes and he sees going to do this, and he says, passing through the street near her corner, and he takes the way to her house. So it's sort of part way through a thought, but we're trying to deal with just one verse. So he's talking about this young man who makes his way, right? He passes through the street near her corner, like where her house is, and he takes the way to her house. And so he's observing this happen, and he sees this guy's doing this. Now it's interesting because it's not implying that he stumbles there. It's implying that he knows the way there, and that he's heading there, and he's going to this place. He's pursuing the temptation. And so that's kind of the idea here. And so what I want to bring into this today, I think, for our purposes, is to realize that one of the first lines of defense you have against temptation in your life, temptation to do evil, to do wrong, one of the first lines of defense you have is fleeing temptation, right? The failure would be to fall into sin, to do something immoral and wrong. And the defense against doing that is that when temptation arises, when you come to suddenly you realize that, hey, I'm tempted to do this wrong thing, that you do everything you can to get out of the temptation. If you try to resist the temptation and stand in the temptation, you just won't make it. You're going to fall and end up going in and doing the thing that you shouldn't do, the thing that some part of you doesn't want to do. And you'll fall into it. And so when the temptation hits, that line of defense is, oh, I'm being tempted. I'm going to flee it, get away from it. And so that's the idea here. Jesus goes so far to say is that if in your life, if your hand causes you to fall into to sin, cut it off. Like, it's better just to get rid of the problem before you fall into sin, because sin is deadly. And in this case, falling into the sin for this young man to go into this woman's house with her and have an adulterous affair is disastrous. It cost him his life. It would have been better had he never gone near her house in the first place. So when he walked down the street, that was the problem. So here's a question. Why do people, when fleeing temptation is so obviously and easily, you can easily see, yeah, that's a good idea. Why is it that so many people do the exact opposite? Instead of running from temptation, a lot of people actually run into it. They go deeper into it, or then they're in a place where they're not tempted, and they'll actually pursue and go towards temptation. Or they might say, I'm not gonna do the bad thing, right? They know they shouldn't. I don't want to be evil. I don't want to do a morally wrong thing, and they know that, so they don't go to do the wrong thing, right? But then they do go to the place where the temptation will occur. They'll so in psychology they talk about ritualizing. They'll do this ritual, but we do that. And why is that? Why do we do that? And I guess what I'll suggest to you today is that the reason people do that is because they actually have decided to fail. They've decided to fall into the sin. There is already inside them something desirous of this. So we want to recognize this as a thing. Like, they want the satisfaction, or they want the pleasure they think they're going to get out of the thing, and so they decide not to do the thing, but to do something close to it, because in some part of their brain down inside, they're like, I'll get to do the thing if I go into temptation. And they almost justify themselves. It's like, well, I can hardly help it. I was so tempted. And so they go into temptation. So I think what we need to do is realize that we need to move the line of defense back even one more step. Fleeing temptation is a good early line of defense, but it's actually not the first line. The first line is a step before that. And it's when we recognize the difference between external and internal temptations. External temptations are when people come or when things come or situations occur from outside of you and they give you opportunity to do something wrong. And so it tempts you like bait on a hook for a fish. When the bait is wiggling in the water, the fish goes after that bait. Well, that's external temptation. That's something drawing the attention and calling the fish to the hook. And it goes and it eats the worm or whatever it is and gets caught on the hook and it's dead. That's external, but there's actually something inside before that. In the fish's case, there's a hunger, right? And in our case, there's a desire. There's something we want. And so what we do is we are drawn by that inner temptation, that inner desire. And it may not be a good desire. Just because it's inside of you doesn't mean it's good. Doesn't mean this is natural. It's a thing that, I hear all these excuses all the time. Just because something came from inside doesn't mean it's a good thing. We have evil desires. We have temptations inside ourselves that aren't always for good. And then what happens is as that desire inside us grows, we see the thing and we want the thing. We want whatever this is. But in this example in Proverbs, he wants to have sexual relationship with this woman. And so that inner desire isn't tamed. That's where the lacking sense part is. He's a young, naive youth. Sure, he doesn't know a lot about the world, but inside him somewheres, he lacks enough sense to go, hey, this desire in me shouldn't rule me. And it would be a wrong thing for me to act on this desire. And that's the line of defense where you don't give yourself permission to feed that desire. See, what happens is we give ourselves permission and then we say, well, I can go, I don't want to be the bad guy, so I'll just go into the temptation. But inside, you've kind of decided to fall. And so you go to the temptation and then you fall. This young man, right? Describes him as naive, lacking sense. It's interesting because he knows the way to this woman's house and he knows what awaits him at this woman's house. He knows actually a lot of stuff. He's not completely naive. He gets it. He knows what's going on. And so he makes his way through the city to her corner, near her house, knowing full well what's going to come out of that. He has learned things in his life, but he's learned the wrong things. He hasn't allowed wisdom to move him forward. Instead, he's learned to follow his instincts, to follow his desires, and not to tame them. And I say all of this to say this. The journey toward wisdom is not merely a journey toward changing your behaviors. It's a journey toward restructuring your inner person so that you're able to prioritize good over instinct, righteousness over appetite. Because if we prioritize the instinct and appetite, then we become unwise and we fall into immorality, and it'll end in disaster for us, for our lives. We need to decide in advance to not fall rather than to decide to fall. And so then we don't just flee temptation, we avoid it completely. Because inside we're dealing with that inner temptation and we're processing it and managing we're working toward removing it. So we pray, we ask God for help because we can't do this on our own. And then we decide, you know what, I want to be a person who's moral. And so I deal with the inner temptation. And then the external temptation actually will kind of take care of itself. Once you've taken care of the internal, it's amazing how it works. A fish that isn't hungry, it doesn't care how juicy the worm looks. It's not going to eat it. That's why sometimes you can go fishing and they aren't biting, as it says. Well, we can learn something from that. Anyway, that's it for today. It's Friday. Have a great weekend. You can check us out online for our Sunday teaching if you like. But either way, the Lord willing, I will be back online, not necessarily early on Tuesday, but I will be online on Tuesday if I can. And we'll do verse 9 together. God bless. Have a great weekend.